This is Songwriting in the All Together with David Rangal, Sohail Khan and James Barr Bowen. In March 2020, as COVID-19 began to stalk the land in earnest, lockdown was declared in the UK and all the gigs were cancelled. We are three songwriters, musicians and performers who happen to live next door to each other in West Yorkshire. And so we decided that in the absence of performance opportunities, we would get together once or twice a week to share some songs and to enjoy each other's company. Gradually, this evolved into a songwriting circle, and we talked more about the craft and industry of what we do to write songs. This series of podcasts is a product of these sessions and conversations. Going Against the Grain, Podcast 3. Today in our Songs in the All Together podcast, we're looking at going against the grain. What does that mean in songwriting? Does it mean going against your grain in terms of the lyrics that you're writing, the melody or musical style that you're going to sing and play in? Or is your intention to convey a meaning that might not sit comfortably with you or your audiences? Or are you offering a new perspective on an issue or a form of music? Or do you intend to provoke your audience into thinking or feeling in a different way? What would you choose to do in terms of not choosing your normal, usual and comfortable way of expressing yourself as a songwriter, and why? First up we have Dave, who's going to play us a song that he wrote, and he's going to tell us why, for him, it's going against the grain. Dave, what do you have for us?
Right. Hi, I'm going to play a song called My Solution, which is a reggae song. So, most of what I do is alternative rock. You know, we know this, and I'm doing something now which is fundamentally very different for me, you know, something that I'm not used to doing. So I did it when I was at the university, so 12-ish years ago, maybe, no, about 10 years ago, because I joined a reggae group there and I wanted to do something different. So, we're going to play this. Slightly different. Bit strange for me, I guess, but...
Go ahead.
What's it called again? It's called My Solution.
Wake up, I'm still dying.
going against the grain for you, musically or lyrically?
Musically, yeah. Not so much lyrically. So I'll come to the lyrics in a little while. The music itself, as I said before, I was in a reggae band at university, which I volunteered for because I had the options to do things, music that I was more familiar with, like blues, folk, rock bands, and these are always things that I'd done before. So I had a lot of new influences. I'm not saying that reggae was new, but the emphasis on reggae, hanging out with different people from different musical backgrounds, really brought that on. I knew artists that, and still do know artists that are doing a lot of reggae. I was also quite a fan of hip hop at the time as well. So it was almost like this fresh excitement that I had. And at the same time, I was like, yeah, I'll volunteer myself for that. I want to do that, but also, it's, I guess, a little bit strange because for me, and at the time, there was still this kind of stigma over, is it okay for a white guy to play this kind of music, I know that we've had artists before, like Sting and the Police, and then, how ska has been adopted by Madness, and then the ska punk movement back in the 90s and early 2000s. So it's like, well, it is kind of okay, it's socially acceptable. I still don't know how I really feel about it or how people are going to feel about me playing this kind of music as well. So for me, it was a bit risky because it was something like, I was out of my comfort zone a lot more. I've talked about songs I've written before about me, talking about discomfort, and things that I don't feel comfortable with, but then actually performing music that I'm not necessarily comfortable with and I've had to sort of fall into. That was a different boundary to overcome altogether, So considering that, reggae music is in itself, a music about overcoming boundaries. It's quite strange, I suppose, racially, from my side of things, to say the same thing back, to say, well, actually, now I feel a bit, for different reasons, but, I'm comfortable about what I'm singing or the type of style that I'm singing.
So you're writing out of your comfort zone, do you think, when you were doing that?
Yeah, and I say not so much lyrically, because the lyrical content is very straightforward, it's very pop songy. So rather than talking about, if I had to compare it to something like Buffalo Soldier, the more classic reggae stuff, the subject matter is totally different because I cannot and have not experienced, anything that, it was all context, it was all context based on the time. For me, it's like, well, I don't have that context, but I do like the music. So the lyrics are your run-of-the-mill love song type music. It's just about being a clumsy guy, not having much going for him, but wanting to get the girl, and then getting the girl at the end. And there's no real depth to it other than, there's no depth to it at all as far as anything too political or provocative goes. It's just purely that. So I felt like in order for it to be authentic, I would talk about these these emotions and everything else like that, and just trying to win the girl instead. And that worked, when we played it live. That's no one queried it. No one thought like, oh, it's a bit strange.
How was this received by audiences then? Presumably you performed.
In fact, because it'd been such a while ago, I forgot the song completely, and I had to dig it out of the vault. I tweaked a few lyrics here as well, and it's interesting. So going back to when we were talking about, when is a song finished? When we first performed it, I don't think it was. I think that I'm a better songwriter now, and I was able to tweak a few things there and relearn them. And in order to do that, I went back to the old recording, which was done in our final assessment. So the crowd obviously were there and everything, and it was really good. It was a really, really good show. So I think that people were more listening out to something that they could dance to and groove to, more than what was actually being said. And I think when you see a band for the first time as well, you don't really catch too much of what people are saying anyway. You might catch the odd chorus, the odd hook line, and with people are singing along, which we weren't to that song because nobody knew it. So, so there was that. I think in the back of our minds, we were all thinking well, we only need to do this once, and then but yeah, no, it went down really, really well.
So in terms of how you put it together as a song, you've identified it as a reggae song because that's where it came out of. And obviously you're in and something we'll come on to in future weeks is about stuff like arranging and how do you do stuff, particularly if you're playing as a bloke with an acoustic guitar as opposed to a reggae band. That makes it different. but you've kept the the offbeat and the structure much the same.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you put it together in terms of writing the song, and when you wrote it as a band and how you do it now as a
yeah, in fact, that's probably one of the more interesting stories because it was exactly that. Because it was a university course project. We were assessed on performance, but also the arrangements of all the songs that we did. So we did some covers and we did our own. And it was like when we came around to doing our own, it's like, well, who's writing it? There was 9 of us in the band, and I was, and still am, as you know, very used to just sort of churning stuff out and doing it all myself and everything. So I said, like, guys, I had to sort of really water myself down a little bit and say, like, I have a riff and I have a chord progression that I want us to work with. So originally, like, if you remember the intro, and then we go straight into the chords, which are now those chords didn't come from me, because what I had was so it's more of a funk riff, really. That was going on. So I said, like, but I kind of knew where I wanted it to go, and somehow they read what was going on. They felt the riff, and they were putting these chords over it. So the harmony was sort of there, and then we just kind of like all morphed it together, and eventually, like, I came, I had the chord progression from there. These minor chords. So it was interesting because it was shaped around a different kind of idea, and it's kind of like, how can we sort of, do it this way? So everything was about getting the beat and the rhythm together. So you've got the drums and you've got the bass, the rhythm section really bossing it, and then I'm playing on the offbeat quite a lot of the time. Yeah. So it comes together that way, and then I transfer it then to like a solo piece, and I think like, right, okay, well, there's, almost most of this song's missing now. So I'm like, right, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to have to sort of fill in the blanks. And so for a solo performance, it is like, okay, well, I'm just going to muffle it and everything, and then play on those offbeats and make it feel a bit more rounded. But yeah, construction-wise, my part individually would be quite sparse, like as far as music goes. So.
Okay. And structurally, is it a verse chorus song, or are there several parts to it?
Yeah, exactly. So one thing I didn't do, I didn't go against the grain with any of the structure or anything else like that. There was nothing too inventive when it comes to arranging stuff. I didn't feel it was necessary. It does exactly that. The A structure. It just has this catchy chorus that I feel. So again, I was working more with what sounds good. Have we got a good open chorus? We talk about open choruses again, where you really open things up and have more sort of wails and more elongated notes, and just having a good sound to it all, making sure the things rhyme. So I've got shoes, lose, tax, and back. Close enough. It depends how you want to say it. And yeah, so there you go. So I just did it as standard as possible. But yeah, really for me it was just about pushing those or overcoming those boundaries that maybe I built up in my own head.
Cool. Cheers. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Very well.
Brilliant. Excellent.
Can't wait to hear your guys.
Well,
you guys even.
Next up is Bar. Bar's going to tell us a little bit about this song, which for him is about going against the grain. But then he's going to play for us, and we're going to have a bit of a chat more about that song.
Okay. My song is called Skin, and this song I wrote it 16 years ago in 2004. And the reason why it's going against the grain for me is because of the person that I write it in. I write it from the perspective of a mother of someone who is a migrant, possibly an economic migrant, possibly a refugee, somebody who's travelling. And then the third verse actually goes to the guy himself about his experiences. Now, I've never been a mother. I've never been an economic migrant. Well, no, I have been an economic migrant. I think we all are at some level because you go where the work is. But I wanted to, to write from a different perspective. So this is called Skin, and it goes like this. Like every mother here, I'm so proud of my boy. With his dark hair, good looks, he's my pride and joy. He's off to see the world with a bedroll in his hand. He's off to make his fortune in a foreign land. He doesn't tell me straight about the fears he'll have to face. He just said he's gotta get away from this place. There's nothing left to keep him in this godforsaken town. If he stays here any longer, just gets him down. Hey son, I hope they welcome you in. You find people to trust even when times are thin. Living on your wits and their goodwill's not a sin. No question about the colour of your skin. Well, I haven't heard for weeks, though he promised me so. He'd always stay in touch about the ebb and the flow. He's a good, honest lad with a good, honest face. He's an upstanding member of the human race. The work may be hard, the hours may be long. He's not afraid of working, his hands and heart are strong. Conditions may be lousy, the pay may be poor, but in rich Western countries they're protected by the law. Hey son, I hope they welcome you in. You found people to trust even when times got thin. Living on your wits and their goodwill's not a sin. No question about the colour of your skin. Well, I finally got here to the so-called promised land after beatings and cheatings that I didn't understand. I always tried so hard, but my face didn't fit. I ended up in trouble where they treat me like shit. We were raided in a hostel in the dead of night by a bunch of local coppers who were looking for a fight. Off to an asylum centre, they welcomed us in with a boot in the kidneys for the colour of our skin. Hey mum, I'm ashamed to come home. I've lost all my pride and everything I own. My face is one bruise from my forehead to my chin, and all for the colour of my skin. All for the colour of my skin. All for the colour of my skin.
Wow, a lot of energy in that song, Bar.
Yeah.
A lot of energy there. And why is that going against the grain for you, or maybe more widely for the audience that might be listening to that?
Well, in a sense, it goes against the grain because, like I say, I claim to be a political singer-songwriter, so I do write about issues that are to do with society, to do with what we do as a society, how we work together, how we whatever, and that means racism obviously crops up often in my kind of lyrical content. But with that particular song, I sort of got an idea to write a song. And again, this, talking about how long it takes to write a song. And that one came out fairly quickly because I got the nugget of the idea of a story. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write this story about, and actually one of the things that it came out of was, do you remember when in Morecambe Bay, those cotton pickers all drowned? Yeah. And there was a change that happened within the British media. The British media, the bottom of the food chain, it was always these damn economic migrants coming here, doing this, doing that. And then suddenly when those guys drowned, they started looking at what their living conditions were and how badly they were treated and how little money they were earning and what a terrible kind of situation these guys were living in, just to somehow make a crust, hopefully to send back home. And so the British media for a few weeks suddenly said, oh, hang on, these guys are human beings as well. Maybe we should be a bit less harsh on them. Now, obviously, the British media hasn't learned, because the British media constantly will do whatever it does to sell newspapers, and I think that goes for a lot of the world media, but the European media. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write this song, and I decided that what I wanted to do was to write from the perspective of the mother, which is not something that I normally do, and from the guy himself, but also to try and sort of personalise the broader issue. And so so that's what I did. And the start of the song lyrically is not particularly complicated.
Right.
It's a fairly obvious narrative.
Yeah.
Once you unpick it.
Yeah.
But I'm very proud of it because it's a fairly simple song. But I have reduced audiences to tears when I've sung it, and not just because my singing was that awful.
Right. Have you had any kind of comeback from people saying you can't kind of do that in those voices? You're speaking for other people.
In that one in particular, not so much. But I have for certain songs that when I sing them, because it's like, well, what do you know about this? And there is, obviously the buzzword is cultural appropriation, where people talk about, we don't need you to tell our stories for us. But one of my arguments as an artist, of course, is that we tell all sorts of stories. We present lots of different ideas and perspectives and try and put it out there with a view to, provoking discussion, hopefully influencing people's perspective to make people start thinking about, the humanity of such things. So I would see that as being an absolutely valid thing that we need to do, that we always need to do. We need to keep telling those stories, but also there is the sort of concept of empathy, that obviously, the idea that if you walk in someone else's shoes, you can possibly try and understand their perspective. Walking in someone else's shoes might be equally writing a song from that perspective, for you to go a bit deeper into it. So for me, that song, I do get quite emotional sometimes when I sing it, because I think, wow, this is a hell of a story. This is not my story, but I feel your pain as well. Right. And that's,
I think there's something quite powerful by delivering something from your own perspective, and like say, stepping into those shoes, but also playing it to probably people who don't think about that kind of thing on a day-to-day basis as well. Like, it's like your audience themselves might be sort of like, well, yeah, we haven't really given that much thought or whatever. So it's almost like you're educating, the specific audience that you have as well. Yeah. Because I'm not saying that you do, you don't, but you're not necessarily going to have like the audience that are from that background. In particular. And it'd be interesting to see how that went down, actually, playing to an audience predominantly of that background versus, a different type of audience from people who were born here into, I guess, maybe a more comfortable life.
Yeah. No, I also feel sometimes singing that song, I'm very self-conscious singing the line about all for the colour of my skin. Well, I happen to have a white skin, so it's not about my skin. But it is very, and one of the things I also would say about it is that the colour of skin is also a shorthand in terms of racism, because it isn't always about the colour of skin. Because one of the things that did happen was that after writing that song, there then came a lot of Polish migrants to Britain and Romanians and all the rest of it, and actually the racism twisted to those guys, even though they're white Europeans, even though they're Christians, but still the sort of society's racism was...
I often like to call it culturalism.
Yeah.
Because it's not, and even if it's not to do with the colour of your skin, it could be the fact that you practice a certain kind of way, or your community behaves differently.
Yeah, culturally well. you eat different food, you pray to a different god, you do things differently, you speak a different language. There's that classic Nigel Farage thing about sitting on a train and not being able to understand anybody anybody's language, and I think tough
So,
night.
so in that sense, are you going against the grain of what you see as establishment society or the mainstream voice, as opposed to going against your own personal grain?
No,
Or in songwriting.
in terms of my grain, I would say that my grain would be very much to write songs. You know, I would seek to write anti-racist songs about race and society. But you know, as we've spoken about often, is the idea as an artist is to show, don't tell. You tell a story and then leave it up to the audience to draw their own conclusions. Is this an injustice, or is this a problem? Or, you know, in there, I'm also conscious of the fact that I throw in there the line about the coppers coming around, you know, the coppers who are looking for a fight. And people have also picked me up on that and said, well, not all police are bastards. And it's, you know, of course not. Of course, they're human beings.
But we're talking about one story.
They're good guys. But the institution or the institutions of the state do often perpetuate the racism and the injustice. And the people who lose out are, of course, the people who are bottom of the food chain, bottom of the pile, who are the migrants, who are the people who have no voice.
Yeah. Okay. So in that sense, what you've got is a song which is looking at what's going on in society. And if I'm clear, when you say you're going against the grain, you're also, there's a certain amount of element of risk to what you're doing.
Yeah.
You reckon? Within that, and that you have to have that. You have to have that sense of risk within what you're doing as a songwriter sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's kind of, you know, being challenging is a good way to go. And I know you're going to come on and talk about challenging your audience.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, because obviously as a performer, one of the things you're trying to do with you know, you're trying to perform to a room of people, and you want them to come with you on that journey. You want them, in a sense, of course, in a, you know, simple sense, you want them to love what you do, and you want them to. Or the easy way to do that is to get them to agree with you. You know, you watch a big festival crowd bouncing along to a crowd-pleasing sing-along, and it's like, wow, the adrenaline you must get from doing that. But sometimes what you want to do with your audience as well is to say, come with me on this journey, but let's think about it. Let's have a discussion. Let's talk about it. Let's agree that we probably don't all 100% agree with each other, and it would be boring if we did so. And then let's, you know, and then we can discuss how does our world work, and look at, you know, conflicting views and conflicting ideas, conflicting stories.
Right.
Did you write the words first then, or did they have some? Did you have a lot of them floating around in your mind, or?
I think I had that riff. I mean, the thing is, what I was trying to do, and if I play you the little riff at the start, you know, I'd been sort of playing around with it, and I wanted to sort of get something that sort of.
Folk song, is it?
No.
You don't think it is when you come to...
You know, in musical terms, all I'm doing is playing the minor scale, and keeping the seventh sharp on the downward thing, which then gives it that sort of slightly eastern thing, slightly
and you're subconsciously prepping your audience towards that direction as well within how the song is going to follow, basically. Musically and lyrically.
But then musically, the song is very, very simple in that all I'm doing is an E minor to a B7 thing, and sort of picking out the notes, and then the second part, the B part, is a G D B7 E minor. And the chorus is a G D B7 E minor.
So it becomes James Barbowen, but it's strikingly obvious where you're going with it, or where you start with it. And like I say, that's carried forward very successfully. Like in the lyrics, I think the story is very strong. It's very clear who you're addressing, at the same time, and where it's coming from. So. It's like they just marry up together really, really nicely.
Yeah, good. I mean, the thing is about, with this, and again going back to your thing, Dave, that thing about not being heavy-handed about a style or whatever, but you are playing around with flavours, and it's like, how do you do that? And it's there's no easy answers. Sometimes you find a riff that kind of works. But you can also, musically, you can pick out and say, well, these are the kinds of chords that these kinds of songs normally have. So you can use them in that sense. So in a lot of ways, my song it's 1,000 other folk songs or something. But slightly different.
Yeah, and like I say, it comes across very, very different, very different. But Sohail, so we were talking about you've got a challenging piece. So what are you going to do?
Well, I don't know. It's challenging. It'll be challenging to some people. So the song that I'm going to sing is again a cappella because my other half isn't here, and it's a song that is going against the grain of everyone that feels they might have a stake in this issue. And I shall sing it now.
Go for it. What's it called?
It's called Sex and Gender.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right.
Where is a man, there is a woman. You can be what you want to be if you want to be free, it's so true. 'Cause sex is gender and gender is sex, don't you know? 'Cause sex isn't gender, it's the modern way to go and grow and grow and grow. Here is a man, here is a woman. We're all the same and equal now, and everybody knows, isn't this the truth? We have come so far, 'cause sex and gender are not the same. Sex and gender are the same after all, what's in a name? So treat me like an equal, even if you don't care. Treat everyone as an equal, even if it's too hard to bear. So everybody come together, clap hands, that's the way that it goes. Everybody come together, hold hands, so we can grow. Everybody come together in this big old world. This is no place for hidden agendas to be hurled. Where there is a being, there's another being. You can be what you want to be if you want to be free, it's all on you. 'Cause love is hate, and hate is love, don't you know? 'Cause hate isn't love, and it's the modern way to put on a show. So here is a thing, and here is another thing. As we're all the same and equal now and free, and everybody knows this, isn't this the truth? 'Cause this is this, and this is this, so long as you bear it in mind. That this is not this, as you step in and out of line. The world is full of issues, and I'm sure that we will find it's all the same, so long as you are really kind. So everybody come together, clap hands, that's the way that it goes. Everybody come on, hold hands so that we can grow. So everybody come together, clap hands, even if you think it's wrong. Everybody come on, hold hands and sing along.
All right.
Slightly off melodic wise, I think, in that one, but no worries.
I remember when I first. Now this is interesting because when I first heard it, I think I I wouldn't say I got it wrong, but I certainly had more of a knee-jerk reaction to it when I first heard it, and now it's settled with me a lot more. I understand it a lot more. So talk us through it yourself then. So how does this go against the grain, and what are you trying to do with it here?
Well, it's an issue basically, and I don't see why you think I'm going against the grain, because everyone is equal, aren't they? And we all live in a world where everyone is equal and everyone is the same, and everything is fine. But that's kind of the point of the song. It's kind of being ironic about a particular issue that's occupying a lot of people right now in my life, and I think in a lot of other people's lives as well.
But then the statements that you come out with it about sex and gender can also be, for hearing it for the first time, can make it feel like you're actually saying the opposite thing until you do come and summarise in the chorus that thing as well. So it's almost like you're taking a risk.
Oh no, it's completely equal opportunities. I say sex isn't gender and sex is gender. So I say both things at the same time within the song.
Yeah, so but, I mean, depending what you pick up on, I suppose it comes right from your own perspective, how you choose to perceive that. But you do have your own strong meaning within that. You have your own kind of like, this is a balanced song.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know plenty of people who, you start talking about something and then they go off on a big tangent about it, and so like, well, and it was a very one-sided argument as well. And I said like, well, I wasn't necessarily inviting that. I was just, raising the issue, which is what you're doing. You're raising the issue in the first place.
So why did you write this song, and where did
because it's going around. This issue is going around. It's one that I feel very strongly about, but I also think that people have become so polarized with each other, and the polarization is not actually. Everybody wants to build an equal and free world. That's the identity. But when you start to touch a certain border and certain boundary, there's certain issues which you can't discuss or cannot discuss. And I think those things exist within very clearly defined camps as you move along each spectrum. So if you move along one spectrum where people are saying sex is gender, and sex isn't gender.
So by that you mean biological sex?
Biological sex.
So what you're born with, and it's like challenging that.
Yeah. So it's the whole issue about can you be a woman or can you be a man if you transition, basically. That's what it's saying. And that's the argument of this song to a certain extent. And it's also looking about it in a certain way. It's satire and it's irony, but at the same time as well, people might say you're just taking the piss because you can, as a mixed race, cis, white male, mixed race descent person. And there's a certain element where I am using it as satire, and with the melody, it's obviously kind of the way it's going to be worked on is it's going to be much more of a softer lyric in some ways. I was a bit stronger because I was singing a cappella, but within that there is also the issue of looking at I'm deadly serious about this issue.
Well, what I think is interesting is that you, lyrically, what you do is you make statements.
Yeah.
But of course, those statements, there's
all weighted.
There's a hidden question mark
within
them. So actually, sex is gender. Yeah. Discuss this. You may or may not disagree with this.
Yeah.
And I think that's again thinking about the sort of craft of songwriting.
Yeah.
Sometimes that idea about presenting an idea as a fixed statement can be sometimes it can be an aggressive thing, but sometimes it just can be an interesting way to draw out your audience. And like you say, it's the idea of the song is to challenge your audience a little bit.
I think it's about challenging the audience, and also it's about issues. Any issue is going to be weighted, and if you're coming from a woke perspective, I don't really like that word, but I can also see why people use it as a pejorative, is it? As a negative, basically. Is there is a risk within those elements on both sides as well, not just woke, but people who are quite radicalized on the other side of those arguments, is to think that you've somehow dealt with it because you're occupying that particular camp. You've got your position, and that's immutable and it's not strong. But then if you want the world genuinely to be about equality, it's about working with difference and having discussion, and sometimes provoking, and I'm deliberately provoking that, and I'm taking that risk. But it's a kind of calculated risk that I'm taking, because I'm asking these things as questions as much as statements within that as well. And what I want is people to kind of reflect on, well, how are we going to come together if we're kind of we're fighting? And it's people, and the thing is, it's people in the progressive sides on either side who are fighting with each other about these issues and feeling very strongly, and with good point. I'm not saying that you're not entitled to feel strongly about these things because they're important issues, But there's this point about equality and coming together, and you're only going to have that if you start to have discussions with each other on a level playing field.
And the idea that everybody's talking, nobody's listening.
Nobody's listening. Yeah.
And it's like something like that. I find trying to find my way through the complexities of the arguments. It's kind of like, well, I can see your point of view. And I think that's what we have to do. Is we have to
point of view, and like everything that you've just said there, and the song itself as well. It's clearly that it's different now. Like I get, we look at last week's podcast and we talked about the art of storytelling, and here you've done it from a very different perspective again, and you've done a quite clear political commentary as opposed to using a metaphor of a bird, or even just talking about yourself or emotion or anything else like that. This is something completely different in itself. So, do you do a lot of other songs that are in this kind of style, like where you do actually give a commentary?
A little bit, yeah. Some songs. There's a song that I wrote called "Not the Answer," which is more about science fiction and imagination, but also has links into domestic violence as well.
Right.
But it's more elliptical because it's more mythologized in some ways, and it's about the imagination, dream states, and did things happen or didn't they happen kind of thing.
So I would say that there's an important point about that that I would be interested to see you do that live in front of an audience.
I'd be interested to see me do it live in front of an audience as well. But I don't think I'm going to be doing it in much of a hurry.
No, I think you should. I think you should challenge us. Me and Dave will be there shouting for you, shouting at you. But I know that one of the things that I do when I do a gig is I quite often, if I've got a difficult story or something, or a difficult subject matter for a song, I think it's really important to frame it before you go there, to kind of give your audience an idea of what you're doing here. Now, whether you give away the punchlines or whether you state what the challenge is here, or say, look, you're going to have to listen to the song.
Of course, yes.
But there are interesting ways that you can again bring your audience with you before you actually do the song, which is why I would argue, the whole performance, the global performance is actually as important as the songs. It's like, how do you introduce them, how do you present them, and how do you lay out,
and then how you're going to make yourself available for discussion afterwards as well. Because there are certain, I think that song is if you're going to intend to provoke your audience or provoke your listeners even, you have to be up for having a conversation. No, I won't pretend that I'm going to stomach anyone having an abusive conversation with me, but I'm more than prepared to have a conversation with someone who's upset about what I've written, because I want to take that discussion further. And it's not about changing their mind, it's about saying, again, look at the perspective.
And we can learn from each other.
And that's really where I sit with that, and a lot of the stuff that I write, which is about provocation, and it goes against the grain because it is a kind of a risk. There are people who, on both sides of the camp, will think you are just taking the piss, and you are not being serious about some very serious issues. And again, I'd say I am deadly serious about those issues.
And as an artist, your job is to put stuff out there in all sorts of ways.
It is to provoke, but with responsibility. You have to be responsible as being able to respond. That sense that when you're responsible, it's able to respond. It's not just having a clever answer. It's about having the ability to respond back to that person on a level playing field, and that's where I can take that discussion.
So in general, we feel that we're allowed to speak and write in different voices, have different perspectives.
So we kind of now moving more into the discussion, the general discussion.
I think so, because I think what I'm noticing is we've got some common ground between us. The main thing that we've really picked out of this is that we've decided to do something that we wouldn't normally do, something that we don't necessarily feel it's the most comfortable thing for us to come out and say and do or perform in the first instance. So we certainly feel that's an acceptable thing to do. Are there any sort of do we feel there's any kind of boundaries where you kind of say no, actually?
Well, I think if you're inciting people to commit a violent act or to think in a particular, everything is about persuasion to a certain extent. So it's where the boundary of persuasion, and even if you want to call it grooming, everyone grooms each other, which is a very valid, a very loaded way of saying, everybody looks at ways of persuading other people to come onto their side. But I wouldn't say if you're inciting and you're saying it's okay to be like this person against other people because you're different. I think then if you're inciting hatred on that level, I think you're crossing that, unless you deliberately intend to do that. But then again, it's like, does it fall into the value of satire then? Does it fall into that value of satire of, oh yeah, I was only doing satire?
Because
You
on
hide behind
occasion,
that.
and like I said, I've got a couple of stories. I've got a friend of mine from South Wales who's a long time anti-racism activist, and he did a song called "I Blame the Immigrants," and it was taking the perspective of being some grumpy old colonel who reads the Daily Mail and setting up all these scenarios. And he sent out links to his music to several places to try and get some gigs. And there was one place somewhere in the, we'll let the ambulance go by, he'd sent out to try and get some gigs somewhere in the Balkans, and the people came back to him and said, look, no, we stand against racism and we don't think that your music is right for us because of this song, I Blame the Immigrants. And it's, possibly because they were not native speakers or something. They hadn't got the satire. They hadn't got the.
That's the issue, isn't it?
And he explained, and then they said, "Oh yeah, right, understand now." But it was, but deliberately doing a song like that is
that's playing the joker and the trickster as well.
Yeah,
and I think that's always a tricky position to occupy, is a position of the joker and the trickster as an artist, because you can end up getting hung by your own joke, basically, if you're not careful. But it's about having that, being able to have that conversation. And I think on the other side of that, people who might react in that way to any of the stuff that we've done today might react in a certain way about it, which is negative, is about, okay, I think also then you need to question about why you're acting in that negative way in order to have that conversation. Because all you're doing is, everybody's social animals and they want to adopt a place where they're safe within a community. And part of that is having the same ideas and having the same perspective. But you sometimes have to challenge that as well.
I mean, the other story I had was about Northern Irish band Stiff Little Fingers on their first album, which came out in about 78 or something. There's a song on there called White Noise, and it takes basically all the racist stereotypes in the verse about black wogs, and then the one about brown wogs, and then saying we're all right because we're all white together, and then it does green wogs. And it's all about Irish people, and saying actually these are three equivalent prejudices that get thrown at us, but they were banned by student unions up and down the country for being a racist band, even though they're a defiantly anti-racist band, because whoever made the decisions was claiming that, because they didn't get the satire. So satire is a very risky,
taking stuff out of context without reading into it.
But also hiding behind satire, I think sometimes people can dress up. It's only the other side of that. Oh, I'm only joking. Which is like I've had on personal experience, coming from a mixed race background. Oh, I'm only joking, when they say, and you think actually you're not. What you're doing is you're pretending to be joking, but actually what you're doing is you're hiding your racism behind that, basically.
A very difficult tightrope to walk. To try and get this right, and again that's to do with framing, and also gauging your audience. And there are certain songs that I won't play to certain audiences because I think actually this is going to be too difficult. It's going to be too hot to handle. Which may be me being a bit of a coward, because I should stand by all my songs and say they're all.
Well, sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. I think.
Maybe so. That's what I always say to myself.
How do we feel about satire in general? Like, are we? Is it valid? Do we feel like it's too strong? Do we feel like we're insulting people for the sake of it? Will some people perceive it that way?
Jesus, it's a tricky one, isn't it? It's like Swift's modest proposal, which anyone who hears Swift's modest proposal, that's Swift who wrote Gulliver's Travels. Go online and look at that. And he wrote, I'm not going to go into what it's about, but go and have a look at it.
Basically about eating babies as the solution to starvation in
Ireland. And, that's what it's about.
And he got received as being this terrible man, of course, but he was an Irishman, and he was writing that as a complete satire on how, basically racism against Irish people.
And he was writing in the 1700s when he was writing that. So I think satire is a useful tool, but like Bar was saying, I would say you have to really be measured and gauge the timing, and when you're going to use it. And also don't use it as a way of just, I'm not writing that song in particular to beat anyone, my song, I'll speak for myself, I'm not writing it to particularly beat anyone about their head. What I want them to do is just reflect a little bit about where...
And maybe come and have a beer with you at the bar and talk about it.
Yeah.
In a civilised manner.
Yeah. So I'm not going to put up with anyone's abuse, no matter what perspective they come from.
Yeah.
I don't care where they come from or what position they have or how angry they might feel. If they're going to be abusive, I don't want to have anything to do with it.
And that's what you have two sides of the argument there, and it's like, well, if a one-sided argument guy wants to come along, you say like, well, you can say what you want, but I've given you an argument already in this song, but I've also given the other one. We can talk about it, we can discuss it, but you're not going to send me down one tunnel vision. You're not going to do that.
But also, you said, I think for all three of us, if people have beef, they will pick out the elements to prove their argument, which is kind of where I'm going with that song. I don't know about the rest.
And for me to basically say like doing a reggae piece, I felt a bit, not sure. I wasn't too sure about it, but then. Does that land on me or does that land on somebody else who's going to pick a problem in that?
Perception is everything. Perception is everything as well.
I feel like I've been culturally appropriate in my approach to how I've done it. I feel it's tasteful and I feel it's good music, and like I didn't have any, like I say, it was probably paranoia I was bringing up in my own mind about it and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think that's a good thing to take from it. It's just like if you're strategic about it, if you don't mean any ill by it, then.
But also, I think the point is that you do need to take responsibility as well. That you, like you say, you think about these things. You don't just.
What you're setting yourself up for.
Yeah, don't just throw it out there and say.
Everything's a risk. I say that to anyone. If anyone wants to come with you, say having worked in live performance, and if anyone knows anything about live performance and performance art, there's a whole history of offending decorum, offending the establishment, or not offending the establishment. People often ask those questions about, you just do it as a calculated risk, but you have to come from a place that you feel that is strong enough inside of you in order to be able to support your position and your take on that. Because ultimately it's down to you, it's on you. Don't just do something to shock without taking the responsibility of what that might entail. Because you can end up in a lot of difficult positions with that.
Yeah, and it's also a question of kind of the zeitgeist as well. That it's perhaps in 5 years' time your song will be, that
just be nothing.
Mean a lot. In the same way that talking about satire, something like the film The Life of Brian when it came out, the Monty Python film. That it was discussed in the House of Commons and it was discussed on TV as this major blasphemous thing. And with 40 years' perspective on that just looks ridiculous. It's just satire. And it's very, very funny. So, but at the time, it was seen as this kind of shock and crisis.
I remember it was a really big thing. It was in the news all the time, and they were going to go to prison about it. They were going to go. I think they got to people threatening legal action. I don't think it ever went.
And it was banned from lots of cinemas and all that. So, and the same,
Do about Life of Brian.
Monty Python film. It's been a very naughty boy.
And that's also happened with music. You get, like the first punk bands were banned from playing in lots of towns because they were seen as provocative and all the rest of it. Is that because of the language they used? Swearing, and again, swearing has become so much more accepted.
And that's the position I think also that I find. There's certain things which are supposed to be shocking, which are now acceptable, and they're kind of faux shocking, pretend shocking. They're not really that shocking. But then, because if you actually do something really shocking, everyone goes, "Oh, can't say that! Can't use that word! Can't do that!"
And then in 5 years' time, it's like
no,
I mean, back to Lady Chatterley's Lover or whatever. With hindsight,
or William Burroughs' The Naked Lunch, which I still think the sections of that you can't read out on the airways because you would just get absolutely slaughtered.
When it comes to going against the grain, you've got various different styles of music as well, which do things quite differently. Prog rock, for example, so taking away from the delivery and the message and everything else like that, but there's also the music in itself can go against the grain. So you've got something which is in an odd time signature or changes time signature throughout. So it does go to show that there's a fair amount of flex that you can actually have as a songwriter, as long as it sounds good, as long as it meets some kind of criteria, that identifies it as a song and people like it, then you can actually go quite far. So when we're talking about going against the grain, I don't think it's too much to actually say that, like, well, even when we're not doing anything so far out that it's unlistenable and it's going to get necessarily banned from radio. It can do, depending on how it's
Extreme noise terror, that's what we need.
Extreme noise terror.
You know,
Is that a genre?
well, there is.
I want to make it one.
But there are some kinds of music which are, you know, if you're not part of that group that plays that music or listens to that music, it is quite unlistenable. Which is very much a, you know, I think is also a creation of artists saying, actually, yes, I'm going to push you in all sorts of ways, and you know, it's kind of questionable. Is that a valid way to go? And I think yes, it is, but you do have to take responsibility, like we're saying.
Well, again, things fall into a mould and they fall into time. You know, there's stuff in the 60s that was incredibly groundbreaking. People burning the American flag. You can go to jail for that, you know. People now burning the American flag and possibly will go to jail for that. Pushing statues into rivers, I believe people were doing that in the 60s as well. You know, things come around, and things are of a time. I mean, I was joking about that happening in the 60s, but it's again those things, isn't it? And those things like pushing a statue now into a river is a completely, some people it's a completely radical act, and some people it's completely justified. And we all have our opinions on that. And so these things are also of a moment, like you were saying, and I'd agree with those points that you were coming up with, that they are of a moment. So does it feel like we've explored going against the grain?
We've done it pretty well. I'm sure we'll come back round to it over time, because these are all themes that
we're working on.
And you know, a lot of the songwriting themes do come back round again from different perspectives, different angles.
So I don't know what our next podcast would be. I've made some notes. I think about getting the audience to listen was one of mine.
Okay.
We also talked about performing presence and how do you perform presence when you're in front of an audience, which is kind of not really technically songwriting, but it's part of the craft of songwriting.
More about performance. Maybe we'll come to that further down the line.
Further down the line. So you have to bear with us out there in podcast land for what our next podcast is going to be. But for now, it's goodbye from me, Sohail Khan.
Me, David Rangel.
And me, James Barbowen. See you next time.
Take care and stay safe.